Masechet Ketubot, Daf Zayin, in which we will complete our discussion of whether it's permitted to have the first bi'ah on Friday night on Shabbat. We'll see the halacha lema'aseh regarding this, and then we're going to move into a very important and relevant topic of the Berakhot that we say at the time of Erusin, as well as Berakhot Hatanim, also known as Sheva Berakhot. So we begin. Rabbi Ameh Sheradmi Ba'al B'Techila B'Shabbat. Rabbi Ameh said it's permitted for a groom to have the first bi'ah with his wife on Shabbat. Now we have a new question we haven't seen before. The rabbis ask, but he didn't write a ketubah. He's assuming that, let's say they did erusin some months before. So at this point, the consummation, the bi'ah, is the nisu'in. Now, what else do we do with nisu'in? We do Sheva Berakhot. Okay, we're going to talk about that on Amud Bet. But in addition, you have to write a ketubah. One is not permitted to be together with his wife if he does not have a ketubah. And so therefore, he's assuming that they did not write a ketubah beforehand during the week, but rather he's consummating, he's actually doing the nisu'in through bi'ah on Shabbat. Wait, there's no ketubah, and obviously you can't, even if you say you're allowed to have that first bi'ah and have cause bleeding and all that on Shabbat, of course you're not allowed to write a document on Shabbat, so how can you allow them to be together without a ketubah? Amalehu atpesuha metaltelin, and the answer is he can tell her, here, take this item, this expensive item, take this vase, this jewelry, and that'll be in as a placeholder until such time that we write the ketubah. The point is that the ketubah, he promises her a certain amount of money at the end of the marriage, and so this is important. The rabbi said he has to obligate himself in these things. So even before he writes it, as long as he transfers to her this deposit, and she can hold on to it even on Shabbat. That will be a placeholder, and then they'll write the ketubah at sometime afterwards. And the Rambam says this is in fact permitted, even though you're doing it on Shabbat. So that's how they did it on Shabbat. They did this deposit, and then it would be permitted to consummate the marriage. Rav Zavid also permitted first bi'ah on Shabbat. Others have a different version, not that he permitted it, but he himself actually did it, which also means that he thinks it's permitted. Okay, now we're going to go into a different direction. How about Yom Tov? Is it the same? Rav Yehuda said yes, on Yom Tov it is permitted. Amara papi mishmeh de Rava lo tema b'Yom Tov de shareh ha b'Shabbat asur, and that a papi, in the name of Rava, said, don't think that when Rav Yehuda said it's permitted on Yom Tov, that means we should infer, only on Yom Tov is it permitted, but Shabbat would be prohibited. Shabbat is more stringent in many ways than Yom Tov. In fact, Rav Yehuda would say it's permitted on Shabbat as well. It just happened to be, when the case came up and someone asked, it was about Yom Tov, and he permitted it on Yom Tov. But he may very well permit on Shabbat as well. That was what Rav Papi said. However, Rav Papa, not to be confused with Rav Papi, they were colleagues, both students of Rava. But sometimes they had differences of opinion, just similar names. So in this case here, Rav Papa, Mishmeh de Rava Amar B'Yom Tov B'Yom Tov Shareh B'Shabbat Asur. He says, no, it was particularly on Yom Tov that Rav Yehuda said is permitted, and not on Shabbat. Amar le Rav Papa. Mai da'atech mitoch she'utra chabura lesorech utra nami shelo lesorech. Rav Papi is now going to argue with Rav Papa. Says, why do you think it's permitted? Is it because of the principle that once we permit making a wound for the purpose of Yom Tov, for food on Yom Tov, is permitted also not for other purposes. So when do we see that making a chabura is permitted? In order to do shechita on an animal. That's permitted on Yom Tov. Things that are for food. So since you can make a chabura and kill an animal on Yom Tov, so too a chabura for first time bi'ah would be permitted. Is that what you're thinking, right? Even though that's not for food, but there's a principle that once it's permitted for food, the same action is permitted even for not for food. Yeah, but not so. This principle is not applied, certainly not across the board. He may even be arguing with the principle at all. It is in fact a machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, so it's a little surprising that he's arguing against this very principle. But he has a source. According to your principle, that any melachat that you can do, because you can do it for food, you can do it also for not for food, then would it be permitted to prepare incense on Yom Tov? Incense to make the room smell nice, or to make the clothing smell nice. They would put the clothing inside in a little box with incense. And that was a very fancy thing to do. So now you're not eating the clothing, you're not eating the smell, but since burning is permitted for cooking food, therefore we would also allow burning for incense. And that's not true. So therefore we see that we do not actually apply this principle of mitoch. And therefore, yes, of course you're allowed to kill an animal, but it doesn't mean that you're allowed to make a habura in first bi'ah. So he thinks it's not permitted. Amar le, the Papa answers him, Alecha amar kera ach asher yachel lechol nefesh, davar shaveh lechol nefesh. The Papa explained to him, no, regarding your very argument, there is a distinction. The Pasuk says that which it can be eaten for all people. So something, even if it's not for food, as long as it's an equal benefit for all people, that would be permitted on Yom Tov. And therefore, something like bi'ah, this would be a benefit for all people. So since it's permitted to do shechita on an animal, and you can do a chabura for food, so too you can do it even not for food, and therefore bi'ah the first time is permitted. And your question about incense, that's a different story, because making incense to make your clothing smell nice, that is not universally practiced. That only very fancy people do that. People that particularly like their clothing to smell nice. But this is not a basic fundamental need that everyone does. Only a few people do. And that's why it's prohibited. So there is a distinction. But the principle that once something is permitted, for other matters does in fact apply, as long as it's a universal item. Okay, Amar le Rav Acha bere de Rava le Rav Ashe ela me'ata nizdamen lo sevi b'yom tov il ve'no shaveh lechol nefesh achiname de asur lemishchate. A challenge to what a Papa says. According to this, if you happen to be able to get a deer on Yom Tov, well, this is not something that most people eat. Deer is also a very fancy food that rich people will eat just once in a while, and so it's not something that's universally it has universal benefit. So would you say it's not permitted because it's not universal? And so he answers, Rav Ashe here answers in line with Rav Papa, Amar le'ana davar hasorech דבר הסורך לכל נפש כאמינה, דבה סבי צריך לכל נפש הוא. So I said something that is a need for all person, and a deer would fulfill a need of any person. It's not about whether the item is always done or not, commonly done or not commonly done. The question is it fulfilling a basic need? Eating is a basic need for all people, and therefore it doesn't matter what the food is, even if it's a common food or a fancy food, all that is permitted to prepare on Yom Tov. Whereas the need for nice smelling clothing is not universal, is not the same across all people, and therefore is not permitted. Okay, so this is a very important sugya for the laws of Yom Tov, and has many applications till today. For example, the idea is that something that would be good for food or health, right? That would be something that everyone needs, something healthy. And for that reason, some decades ago, when people thought that smoking was healthy, it was okay, you're permitted to smoke on Yom Tov. Because many people smoked, and it was good for you, they thought. So it's permitted. But this is something that can change now that we know that smoking is deadly, and very few people do it. So therefore, we would not call this anymore davar hasarich lechol nefesh, and much discussion about that. Or similarly, taking a shower. Once upon a time, most people did not take a shower every day. They went to the bathhouse once a week, and so showering was not davar shaveh lechol nefesh. Nowadays, many health benefits, and most people do take showers on a regular basis every day. And so these definitions themselves can be dependent on our understanding and changing times. Okay, so that's very significant. And so that ends that question. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi hora Rabbi Yochanan b'Saidan asur lib'ol b'techila b'Shabbat. We saw a whole bunch of opinions that said it was permitted, but Rabbi Yochanan, when he was in the city of Saidan, here it is up above the Galilee, said that one is not allowed to have the first biyah on Shabbat. And now we have a question. What do you mean hora? He issued a ruling. Usually when you say he issued a ruling, it means he permitted something that most people thought was prohibited. They weren't sure. They couldn't look into it. And so it's a big chidush to say something is permitted. It's not so much of a chidush that you have to go out of your way to make a special ruling to say something is prohibited, because it takes greater strength and knowledge to permit something. Anyone can just say, who knows, maybe it's prohibited. So that's the question. The word hora'ah usually it refers to something that's permitted. So how can we be saying hora Rabbi Yochanan and then he says prohibited? Is that the proper use of that term? And we say, yes, it is, even though you're right. Hora usually means to permit. Here's a couple of examples where it's to prohibit. In V'atenan horuha bet Hillel sheteh nezira od sheba shanim acherot. This is a Mishnah in Nazir, an interesting case of the Queen Helena of Adiabene, a real person. She's mentioned in historical sources. She was a convert to Judaism, and she accepted upon herself to be a Nizira for 7 years. And she practiced the Nizirut for 7 years up in the north where she lived, outside of the land of Israel. She had her own little compound, a small country called Adiabene. And then at the end, she was finished with the 7 years. She came to Eretz Yisrael in order to give the required sacrifices. Bet Hillel said to her, sorry, but you can't be a Nizira outside the land of Israel. You can only practice it in Israel, and you have to start all over again. And she did. She started from the beginning and did another 7 years. So this is a hora'ah. So it uses the term horuha, even though it was for prohibition. So, yes, it can in fact be used in such a way. The following Berakhot says that regarding terefa is an animal that will not live for a year. So if we have an animal whose spinal cord is severed, mostly severed, then we can assume that it will not live, and it's a terefa, not kosher. Rabbi Yaakov Omer, afidu nikab. Rabbi Yaakov is more machmir, and he says even if there's a perforation in the spinal cord, that is also a terefa. Now, for these two opinions, hora, Rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi made a decision like Rabbi Yaakov. Now, Rabbi Yaakov was the machmir one. Even a small hole will make it not kosher, and yet it uses the word hora. Okay, so that's our proof. Incidentally, now that we brought up this halacha, you should know Amar Rav Huna and halacha Rabbi Yaakov. The halacha does not follow that stringent opinion. So don't worry about if there's a little hole in the spine. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Madne Hachi. Okay, so that here we saw that the word hora, I guess usually hora means that he's a question was asked, no one knew, and okay, usually it would be a big deal for someone to say it's permitted. But if it was a question that came up and no one knew, and someone said prohibited, like in the Bet Hillel case, so you could use the word horu even for stringency. All right, so that was in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and now we have a second version of what Rabbi Yochanan says. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Matneh Hachi Amar Rabbi Abhu Sha'al Rabbi Ishmael ben Yaakov de Minsor et Rabbi Yochanan besaidan. Rabbi Yitzchak taught it this way, and in his version, it's the same law, but it's just a different setting. That the present were Rabbi Ishmael ben Yaakov. He's from the city of Sor, but he happened to find Rabbi Yochanan in Saidan, who was there for whatever reason. That's that same city on the top of Yam Kineret. And I was there, Rabbi Nachman says, and I heard him talking. And the question was, is it permitted to do first time beyond Shabbat? Rabbi Yochanan said it's not allowed. Okay, so we just saw from the beginning of this daf a few sources, opinions that said permitted, and then Rabbi Yochanan that said prohibited. And here's the bottom line: V'hilchata mutar lib'ol b'techila b'Shabbat. One is permitted to have the first time bi'ah even on Shabbat. All right, fantastic. And so now we get to the next topic. Amar Rabbi Chelbo, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rabbi Abba, Bar Zavda, Amar Rav. Achat betula v'achat almana te'una beracha. The next topic is about blessings. And so these sages, in the name of Rav, said that both betula and an almana. Whenever we say almana, even back to the Mishnah, that almana gets married on Yom Chamishi, it doesn't mean only a widow. It could be also a divorcee. Point is not a betula. Somewhat first marriage versus a second marriage. Both of them require a beracha when they get married. To say a beracha. Umi amar Rav Huna, Umi amar Rav Huna hachi. Now, question: did Rav Huna really say that both of them require beracha? Amar Rav Huna amana ena te'ona beracha. Rav Huna says that a second marriage for the bride does not get a beracha. So la kashya, no, so as we can resolve this, kan bebachor shenasa almana, kan beba'almon shenasa almana. It depends on the groom status also. If you have if it's the first time marriage for the groom, bachur, he's a bachelor, and he marries a bride who is a widow, well, for him, it is his first marriage. Okay, we're talking here about Sheva Berakhot, that we say at the chuppah, and the Sheva Berakhot are all about the happiness, the joy that Hashem comes and brings to this couple. So it's very grand and beautiful, and it's appropriate when it's a first-time marriage for either one, because then they're really super happy to be able to attend, that Hashem created everything, and we think about Yerushalayim, and finally, Shabbat, Sason v'Simcha. Okay, so that Sason v'Simcha, that special joy, is true for a first marriage, even if it's his first marriage and not hers. Whereas kan be'almon shenasa almana, but if it's a second marriage for both the bride and the groom, then while they're happy, it's not the same level as happiness, and therefore we do not recite Sheva Berakhot for a second marriage if it's both of their second marriages. But that's how we can resolve the two statements of Rav Huna. On the one hand, he said they both need betula and almana. On the other hand, he said no, an almana does not get a beracha, and that's because it depends on the guy. If either one has a first marriage, we say the berachot, berkot hatanim. Ve'almon shenasa almana lo. And so now we ask a question: is that true that if the second marriage for both the bride and the groom, then we would not say ani berachot? Ve'amar Rav Nachman amar li Huna bar Natan tana. Here's a source that the Birkat Chatanim, that's synonymous with what we call today Sheva Berachot. How do you know it has to be with 10 people? You need a minyan in order to say Sheva Berachot. Usually there's a lot of people at a wedding, so we don't have to worry about this. But this happened during coronavirus when we had to make very small weddings. The question was, what's the minimum amount of people that can be at a wedding so that they can spread out and we don't endanger anyone? And so basic halacha is you need 10 people. The chatan, in fact, can be one of them. And the rabbi is one of them, and the witnesses are 2 of them. So, you're automatically going to have some people there. All right, how do you know that you need 10 people? Shne'emar, vayikach 10 anashim miziknei ha'ir, vayomer shevu po, vayeshebu. When Boaz decided he's going to marry Ruth, he went and collected 10 elders of the city, and he said, sit here at the gate, and they sat, and they did the whole ceremony. Boaz almon shenasa almana hava. And in that case, Boaz was an almon. It's not in the Peshat. We're not sure what his background is, but Midrash says he was married and had a lot of kids. And she certainly, Ruth, was married, and she was a widow. And even so, they this is the in Megillat Ruth. It does say that the elders bless Boaz, and they say, "Yiten Adonai ta'isha ba'abatecha kerachel uchla asher banu shetem et bet Yisrael va'aseh chayil." May Hashem bring this woman into your home, and may she be like Rachel now, who built the house of Israel, and you should have strength. We continue, the Syrian custom at least is to recite that right after the Sheva Berachot. Berakhot, we recite that beautiful pasuk. It's one of the nicest things that people don't even realize that we do. And it makes sense why we do that, because this is the very source for saying Sheva Berakhot with 10 people at a wedding is from that context. So it's true, those 10 elders do bless them, although not with the exact text of the Sheva Berakhot as we say. But the point is that since in this Baraita we learn that Birkat Chatanim is said with a minyan from Boaz and Ruth, and they were an Alman and Almana, we can see that for an Alman and Almana, we do say Sheva Berachot. So why did you just tell me that if it's a second marriage for both of them, we don't say it? This source says we do. So, my ena teuna beracha damar Rav Huna ena teuna beracha kol shiva. Aval yom echad teuna beracha. No, you misunderstood. When Rav Huna said that we do not require the Sheva Berachot if it's a second marriage, he was talking about Sheva Berachot all 7 days. But one day, for sure, any marriage, you need Sheva Berachot. So the marriage ceremony itself on the first day, under the chuppah, what we call chuppah, the canopy, for sure, Sheva Berachot, even if it's a second marriage for both of them. When I was talking about, he says the subsequent days, when they have a special party for the Chatan and Kala, so if it's a first marriage, they'll say Sheva Berachot. If it's not, then they will not. Okay, good. Ela haditanya shakdu chachamim al takanat benot Yisrael sheyeh sameach imaha shelosha yamim. Hold on, we have another problem, because remember we saw in that Tosefta that the sages were diligent for the daughters of Israel, that they wanted to make sure the groom would be there, present and happy with his wife for 3 days. That was talking about an almana. So they said, therefore, almana should get married on a Thursday, and that way they'll be together on Thursday, on Friday. They'll take off for work on Friday, because most people don't work on Friday anyway. And Shabbat, he's not going to work, and so he'll have 3 days to be happy with his wife. So, B'mai, what kind of case are we talking about? If it's his first marriage, we're already established that if it's either of their first marriage, then they have Sheva Berachot, meaning all 7 days. So then it would be certainly 7. Ibe Almon, and if it's talking about a second marriage for both of them, a widow and a widower, then Ha'amart Yom Echad, we already said 1 day. So we already had an answer for everything, and it was either 1 day or 7 days. 1 day if it's first marriage for both, 7 days if it's 1 day if it's a second marriage for both, 7 days if it's a first marriage for either one. What case is this talking about where it says 3 days for an almana? So we have a couple of answers that we can actually combine together. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Okay, beracha and simcha may be two different things. And so if it's a widow and a widower, then it'll be only 1 day for beracha. Beracha at the wedding ceremony itself, and no Sheva Berachot after that. But you also have to spend 3 days together with her, and don't go to work for 3 days. That's two separate halachot, so you can have 1 and 3. That would be the case there. Or the other case is if it's the groom's first marriage, then he gets Sheva Berachot all 7 days, because he's so happy, it's his first marriage. So he deserves that. Whereas for simcha, that's mainly the obligation of the groom, for his wife to not go to work. Usually the men would go to work, so he should stay home and make his wife happy. Since if his wife is only an almana, then 3 days is sufficient. If she is a bitula, then 7 days is sufficient. So, beforehand we were assuming that the not going to work and being happy with the wife is equivalent to making a meal with Sheva Berachot, but actually these are two separate matters, and we can divide them. Okay, now question on that. We have a baraita that says we say the Sheva Berachot for betula 7 days, for an almana 1 day. So it sounds from here that's only dependent on her status. So my love afilu almana sheniset lebachor. It sounds like even if this almana, if she is a widow, even if the groom is his first time, it will still only be 1 day. way, because in this baraita, it only talks about it being dependent on her status. And this would contradict what we said above. No, it means when the both of them is a widow and a widower, then it's 1 day. That's what it's talking about for 1 day. Aval lebachor mai shiv'ah. Oh, but if it's his first marriage, then it would be 7. If so, the Baraita should have said so. It should have been a little clearer and said, we say a blessing for a bitula if she is for her first time marriage, then 7 days. If it's an almana, her second marriage, but his first marriage, also 7. But if she is married, her second marriage and his second marriage, then 1 day. You should have said so. And so the answer is milta de pesikta katane. This baraita is writing in shorthand. It's just only writing the categories. There is no case where you have a betula that would get less than 7. So she gets 7. And there's no way that there would be an almana that would be less than 1. So the minimum, if we focus just on her, there's a minimum for 1. And even if she is an almana, and that would only be true if he is an almon also. And if she is a betula, then you say Sheva Berakhot all 7 days, and no less, even if he is an almon. Okay, very good. So now we've established how often we say the Sheva Berakhot. We're going to go back to the source that we brought from Boaz and analyze that pasuk better and bring a second pasuk as well. Gufa Rav Nachman Amali Huna Bar Natan. Rav Nachman says that Huna Bar Natan told him the following baraita Tana. Minayin lebirkat chatanim ba'asara. What's our source that you have to have a minyan at a before to recite birkat chatanim? Because Boaz took 10 men. This is actually one of the best sources for the fact that a minyan is in fact 10 men, that he comes and takes them. Here they're also elders, which suggested that they're kind of judges, and he also makes a declaration that this other guy didn't want to do it, so he does the chalitza. Okay. But in any case, there are 10 men there. Pasuk from Psalm 68 that we recite on Shavuot says, in large gatherings, in assemblies, we bless God, and we bless Hashem from the Mekod Yisrael. Mekod is another a reference to the source or the womb. And so matters that have to do with marriage, procreation, the womb, the source of Israel that will procreate the next generation. So something that has to do with marriage, we should bless God in a large gathering. So a large gathering means, it doesn't say explicitly here 10, but we know from other sources that a minyan actually represents the entire community. You see that in lots of places. Like if you have to apologize to someone who's deceased, you bring a minyan there. So the minyan represents the public. Okay, so you have to do it in public, and that would be 10 people. Rav Nachman Bahai Kerad Rabbi Abhu Maidarish Be. Okay, so now we have a question. We have two sources. The first one from Rav Nachman, from the Boaz pasuk, and the second from Rabbi Abhu, from the Tehillim pasuk. So the question is, Rabbi Abhu, what does Rav Nachman do with the pasuk that Rabbi Abhu uses from Tehillim? He can use it for the following statement. To teach us the following Agadah, that even fetuses that were inside the wombs of their mothers, when at the splitting of the sea, not only all the men and the women said Shirah, even the fetuses were singing a song. Maybe this is a source that people put headphones on the bellies, and so the kids could listen to Beethoven. So yeah, even kids can enjoy music, and fetuses can sing. And how do we know that? From this pasuk. In large gathering we'll bless Hashem, even from the Mekod, even from the source, meaning the womb of Israel. There you go. Okay, ve'idach. And how about Rabbi Abhu? What is he going to do? How is he going to? How come he doesn't agree with this? Imken lema kerami beten, my mimekod, aliske mekod. Now, if you want to talk about the womb, usually use the more usual word beten. The word mekod is not the same. Doesn't mean the same thing. Mekod is talking about the source of Israel. The source of Israel is the bride and groom getting together, and they will. It's true. Then reproduce the future, but it's talking about more. It's more referencing the foundation, the root, which is the marriage, more than the uterus itself. That would be the word beten. Okay, V'Rabbi Abhu b'haykera de Rav Nachman ma'idarish. Now the other way around. What did Rabbi Abhu do with the pasuk of Rav Nachman regarding Boaz? What does he use it for? Hahu mi'ba'alei midrash Amoni velo Ammonit, Moabi velo Moabit. No, he says there they needed 10 men for a different reason, because Boaz had to ask a halachic question: am I permitted to marry Ruth? After all, she is a Moabite, and Torah says don't marry a Moabite. And they said yes, it's permitted because only the males are prohibited. It says Moavi lo yavo Amoni or Moavi. But the females are permitted. Moavi and Moavit is permitted, and so that's why he had the 10 people there, not because of Sheva Berakhot. Because if it's just for the Berakhah, then why do they need to be elders? We don't require that you have 10 judges or 10 learned people at every wedding. You just need 10 people. So all you need is a minyan. And so you see that they were gathered for a special reason, to be as judges for a halachic reason. Okay, v'idach, Rav Nachman, what are you going to do? And that sounds like a good point. What are you going to do with that? No, if it was just that he had to ask a halachic question, that they wanted to teach us halacha, then you wouldn't even need, then would you need, even 10 would be, even less than 10 would be sufficient. Right? Why do you need 10? You could have asked one rabbi or 3, betin. So you don't need 10. And we answered to him and said, in fact, you do need 10 for halachic ruling also. Because whenever you're going to make a new halacha that people don't know yet, you have to publicize it so that, it's not just one person I heard. You want to publish it. They didn't have printing. How do you publish something before printing? You say it in front of 10 people, and then they makes it official. And then because you assume that now everybody can know it. How do we know that? Shemuel told Rav Chana, who was from Baghdad, he says, go, I want to teach you a halacha. I want to publicize a halacha. Go and get 10 men, so that I can teach this halacha in front of them. See, it wasn't sufficient. He didn't want to just say it in front of one person. He wanted to publish this halacha. So the halacha happened to be about Hamzakeh le'ubar kana, happened to be about ubar, and we were just talking about ubar. Okay, someone who transfers ownership of something to a fetus. Says, I want to give a baby gift. Not just a baby gift, a fetus gift. Is a fetus enough of a person that can acquire something? And he says, yes, it's possible to do that. And it will be owned by the fetus. Kana. So he wanted to publicize halacha, so he said in front of 10. And therefore, we see that, in fact, Rav Nachman argues, Boaz gathered 10 men together in order to publicize the halacha that a Moabite woman is permitted. Good. Now that we know what each of the sages did with the other pasuk, we just end off with a tangent that regarding this gifting to a fetus, hilchatam zakel ubar lo kana. In fact, one cannot transfer ownership of an object to a fetus. All right, and so now we continue more on the Sheva Berakhot. Tenora banan mebarachin birkat hatanim bebet hatanim. Rabbi Yehuda omer af bebet harusin mebarachin otam. So Tanakh Ammai in this Beraita says that we say Birkat Chatanim. Again, this is what the Talmud refers to, Sheva Berakhot. We say it in the house of the Hatan. Back then, there would be a special hut or home where the Hatan and Kala would live. during those 7 days. Maybe they would live there afterwards as well. And so they would have, people would bring food and drink to the house and visit them, and they would make celebrations there each day, each night. And so there, if you're at the house of the Chatanim, then you say the Sheva Berakhot all of those 7 days. Rabbi Yehuda says, also at the time of Erusin, Bet Erusin, which may have been several months before, and he gives her the ring and says, you cannot marry anybody else. Also, you say Sheva Berachot. Now, this is a bit surprising. Why would they say Sheva Berachot at that time? We're talking about only in Judea, because in Judea they had the interesting practice that even right after the Erusin, they would allow the young, the bride and groom to live together. Why did they do that? Couple possible reasons. One is because they wanted them to be more acquainted with each other and not have the first time that they are alone be the wedding night, and then they'll be kind of embarrassed from each other and will not be able to consummate. So they said they can live together. Another reason may be at the time of that persecution, when the Roman general would come and take every bride, and that was very upsetting. So they allowed the couple to at least live together beforehand and ameliorate some of the problems there. Okay, whatever the reason, since they were already living together, now you can't allow them to have yichud, to live together, if they don't have Sheva Berachot. So since they're going to live together, they say Sheva Berachot at the time of Erusin. Okay, good. Tanya Idach. Another braita. Bebarechin birkat chatanim bebet chatanim uberkat erusin bebet erusin. Another version of this braita is the first part is the same. We say the blessing of chatanim in the house of the chatanim, whereas we say birkat erusin, a different beracha altogether, in the house of erusin, wherever they do the erusin. Okay, so this is a different beracha. What is this other beracha? Well, we still have it today. Here it is. Birkat erusin may mevarech Rabin bar Rav Ada v'Rabba bar Rav Ada. Tarvahu mishmed Rav Yehuda Amreh. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher qiddeshanu b'misvotav v'sivanu al ha'arayot. So it starts off with, Hashem, thank you for commanding us with all of your commandments. From this beginning, it sounds like this is a birkat ha-mitzvah. All birkat ha-mitzvah start off in this way, and Rambam, in fact, says this is a birkat ha-mitzvah. Other Rishonim say, no, it's a little different. Usually we don't say a beracha on negative prohibitions. Sivanu, you commanded us not to be together with those that are prohibited to us. So rather, they say this is a berkat shevach. We are thanking Hashem for the mitzvot in general, and for making us special and different, and making us holy through this and sanctified through these laws. This is important. Would make an important practical difference. If it's in fact a berkat shevach, then anybody could say it, and usually the rabbi says it. If it's berkat mitzvah, then it would be preferable for the chatan to say it, right? Usually, berkat mitzvah, whoever is performing it says it. Although it could be that since chatanim, some of them are learned, some of them are not learned, some of them are not not literate in Hebrew. So then, in order not to embarrass anyone, so the rabbi will say it for everyone. And in fact, that's also possible. If I'm blowing shofar for other people, I can say the beracha, and they can listen in. But ideally, if it's a berkat mitzvah, the chatan should say it. And we've had a couple of chatanim that have said this beracha. Okay, in any case, we thank Hashem for commanding us regarding those the prohibited relationships. V'asad et ha'arusot v'yitir et ha'nesuot. Hashem made clear boundaries and said those who are arusot, engaged, dedicated to be married to a single person, are prohibited. They're prohibited, in fact, to everyone. They're prohibited to all other men, and they're even prohibited to their own husbands. until the time of chuppah. However, you permitted to us those who are married through chuppah and kiddushin. The chuppah and kiddushin are out of order. Really, I should say kiddushin first and then chuppah. But perhaps it's in this order, so you don't be confused if someone listens and says, "Hitei lanu et hanusuot al yedei kiddushin," and maybe they don't hear the rest. The chazan singing too long and they forget the next word. So in order not to make a mistake to think that a woman is permitted after kiddushin, switch the order and say through chuppah after having also done kiddushin. Okay, and so that's the main body of the beracha. And interestingly, we add a word here. V'yetilanu et hanisuot lanu. See, you might make a mistake. There's no manuscript differences. I'll show you. Here's the manuscripts. They all say v'yetilanu et hanisuot, and not one of them says the word lanu. The word lanu is in fact added by the Benutam in order not to make a mistake. If you say, God Hashem, you permitted us those who are married. What, even someone else's wife who is married once you do nisuin? No, that would be a mistake. So therefore, those who are married to us, one is allowed to be with his own wife, but not with anybody else's wife. So that word is added for clarity. Okay, so that's the body of the beracha. Ravacha bered Rava mesayem ba mishmeh Rav Yehuda. Baruch atah Hashem mekadesh Yisrael al yedei chuppah vekiddushin. So while the first opinion here just has one, a half a beracha, the shortened of one, but in the name of Rav Yehuda, they would conclude with a whole conclusion that thank you Hashem for sanctifying Israel through the ceremonies, the mitzvot of chuppah and kiddushin. Right? There's general things that are sanctified, are special, set apart, clearly defined. This is okay, this is not okay. That's what makes them special. And so too with marriages, with families, the basis of the source of Israel, Makor Yisrael, is based on the separation of a full dedication between a husband and wife. Okay, man de lo hatim midi dehava berkat perot berkat mitzvot. According to the first version here, Rabbi and Bar Yehuda, they said the name of Rav Yehuda, only a half a beracha, a short beracha. So they did not conclude the beracha because they figured it's similar to the beracha that we say over fruit or food, or berkat mitzvot. Interesting, it compares it to both perot and mitzvot. So we can't derive from here whether it's a Birkat HaShevach or Birkat HaMitzvah. The point is, in terms of length, it's just a short beracha, like you say, Al Netilat Lulav. That's it, short beracha. Man dechatim midi dahava akidusha. Whereas one who does say the added conclusion would say this is like kiddush. That we say on Friday night, that has a long paragraph because it has a lot to say. So you have to have a beginning Baruch and an ending Baruch as well. Okay, so tomorrow we'll see actually what the Sheva Berakhot are. But one last point regarding Sheva Berakhot, it says you have to say them bebet chatanim. And in those days, the bride and groom would spend the 7 days in the home that they are living in. And because of that, there are some, this is machloket Rishonim and modern poskim. There are some who will say we only say all 7 of the berachot during those 7 days if we have the party and the meal in the house where the chatan and kala are living. Others say, no, what if they go to a friend's house or to a restaurant or some other place? Can you say it there? Well, they're there for the celebration, for a special meal for the chatan and kala, and so we can consider, Tosafot says, we can consider that, not Tosafot, the Ran says, we can consider that like their house, because now they're there and having a meal there. And so even if they're only visiting, or they're for a short time there, even though it's not their permanent house, we can still call it Bet Chatanim. So this is a huge machlok between Rishonim, Acharonim, and even today in this community you see multiple practices. So it depends on how we define that word and the application of that word, Bet Chatanim. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.